Ladybird Lake.
Ladybird Lake.
Ladybird Lake.
Ladybird Lake.
Ladybird Lake.
At 7:37 a.m. on the 14th of April 2024, the Austin Police Department received a call about a body in the water. That water was Ladybird Lake, and the body was the third to be pulled from its gloomy depths in 2024 alone. That on its own is disturbing enough, but it's the long history of suspicious deaths and unexplained disappearances around Ladybird Lake which have fueled a growing fear amongst locals that a serial killer is using downtown Austin to hunt their prey and the mysterious waters of the lake to cover their tracks. With each new victim, the mystery surrounding Ladybird Lake thickens. Online forums are filled with speculation over how each victim and the circumstances of their death are connected. Whether it's their age, social habits, or the locations where they were last seen, every detail has been scrutinized until the theories read more like an investigation than speculation. But authorities have continued to deny any such connections exist. They point to those same factors as proof coincidence rather than conspiracy. So who do we believe? Is the presence of a serial killer just the wild imaginings of an internet phenomenon? Or are they onto something? Before we go through each of the victims which are linked to the mystery surrounding Ladybird Lake, let's start with the beginnings of the lake itself. Ladybird Lake is located in the heart of Austin, the capital city of Texas. It's a man-made body of water which was formed in 1960 when a dam was built to form a large reservoir. Water from this reservoir was channeled to the Seahorn power plant to cool its turbines and to avoid them overheating. The lake spans over 400 acres in central Austin and is fed by various tributaries, including Barton Creek. It stretches along the Colorado River, with its northern boundary near downtown Austin and its southern end reaching towards the Barton Creek Greenbelt. When the Seahorn power plant was decommissioned in 1996, it left the reservoir without a purpose. At that time, it was known simply as Town Lake. In the early years after the reservoir was first formed, it had been popular with families seeking an escape from the summer heat, but over time, the area surrounding the lake's shores had been neglected, and it gained a reputation as a bit of a dumping ground. Officials were left with two options: leave the lake as it was, or make Town Lake a reason to visit the area rather than a reason to stay away. Now, eventually, the Austin City Council decided on the second option, and they committed significant resources to refurbishing the shoreline and the surrounding areas. Their first act of business was to rename the lake in honor of the former First Lady, Claudia Johnson, who was known by her nickname as Lady Bird. Claudia had long been an advocate for the city of Austin, and after the renaming, she devoted much of her time to improving the lake's usability. She advocated for removing the years of untamed weeds, overgrown bushes, and rubbish that was littered along the shoreline and replacing them with hiking and biking trails, as well as picnic and recreation areas. In time, the trails were connected into a 10-mile trail loop which circles the whole lake with specific areas dedicated as wildlife sanctuaries. The way locals viewed the lake began to change. It was seen as an escape from the bustling city, and on the weekends, the parks would be filled with families enjoying its revitalized beauty. But even with the significant renovation of the shoreline of Ladybird Lake, there was one thing that no amount of money or time could change: the water itself. It has been illegal to swim in the lake since 1964. Locals who lived in the area at the time that it was known as Town Lake might have you believe that the ban is due to poor water quality from rubbish being dumped on the shore, and that the construction of the dam left dangerous materials littered along the lakebed. After all, the lake was never intended for recreational use. It was always meant to be for industrial purposes. But the truth behind the ban is much, much darker. In the early years of the lake's formation, the area was extremely popular with families. Austin can reach temperatures of 90 degrees plus in the summer, so swimming at the lake was a favorite pastime for many locals. But tragically, within the first 2 summers, 3 young children drowned in the lake. This put the city council under pressure to declare a ban on swimming altogether. Later, they added bans on the use of motorized leisure equipment on the lake, such as boats and jet skis. Fishing is also restricted to certain times of the year. Without the option of swimming or boating, the lake is mostly used for stand-up paddleboarding, canoeing, and kayaking. The swimming ban almost certainly reduced the number of drowning-related incidents at Ladybird Lake, Yet, despite the passing of years, an aura of foreboding continues to cling to the lake, permeating its very surface. Because people have continued to die at the lake, just not in the way they did at the start. Onto the bodies. Exactly which body was the first to be discovered in questionable circumstances at the lake isn't clear. Some of the internet forums would say that it was one of the victims from the last 5 years, and others would say the mid-2000s, and the more extreme takes are that bodies started showing up almost as soon as the lake became known as a death trap for swimmers. I mean, what more perfect cover is there than a lake with a reputation for drownings? There was a death of a local businessman who was found in the lake in 2008. When his body was finally retrieved from the water, the police discovered that his hands and feet were bound, and yet the man's death was ruled as a suicide. That man was Riyad Hamad. He was reported missing by his wife on the 13th of April 2008 when he didn't return from a trip to the store. Just 1 day later, a woman walking by the lake reported that she thought she could see a body floating in the water. When authorities retrieved the remains, they were identified as belonging to the missing 55-year-old man. A news report that same day said authorities believed that he had taken his own life. Tragic? Yes, but suspicious? No. Except, the woman who reported Riyad's body to authorities was sure that the authorities had made a mistake in their determination of his cause of death, and so did bystanders who watched Riyad's body being removed from the water. They had all clearly seen that Riyad's hands and legs were bound, and that there was duct tape over both of his eyes and his mouth. And the imam who prepared the body for his final rites claimed that there were injuries on Riyad's body which looked like he had been beaten or attacked before his death. When the duct tape and bindings went public, the authorities were forced to answer questions from the public, but they doubled down on their findings, saying the bindings of his hands and legs and placement of the tape were consistent with Hamad having done this to himself. They went on to say that Riyad's own family believed that his death was self-inflicted because he had been feeling suicidal for months. Riyad had a history, which included his home being raided by the FBI just a couple of months before his death. This was thanks to him being an outspoken critic of the US Middle Eastern policy. Since Riyad's death in the lake, the FBI have not commented on the case, and he was never charged with any crime. Despite the circumstances surrounding Riyad's life and death, the authorities declined to open the investigation, and the original determination of suicide remained. But in the context of what has happened in more recent years, Riyad's case has come back into the spotlight, and so too have the actions or inactions of the authorities responsible for investigating deaths on the lake. Many more bodies would be found in or around the lake over the coming years, and right up until the present day. Many of these victims have been found in odd or inexplicable situations, and still, the explanation from authorities remains the same. It's just a coincidence. No need to worry, and there's nothing to see here. Well, let's fast forward from Riyad's death in 2008 to 2022, when the number of unexplained deaths on Lady Bird Lake began to accelerate at an alarming rate. Up until then, the number of bodies being pulled from the lake was averaging around 3 to 4 per year. But between 2022 and 2024, at least 13 have been recovered. The sudden spike in deaths prompted many to wonder if a more sinister pattern was emerging. At this point, it is no longer possible to deny the similarities or connections between the victims and the way in which they died. Let's begin with the most recent victim retrieved from Lady Bird Lake. On the 5th of July, Austin PD conducted a briefing announcing that a body had been pulled from the water near the 50 block of Rainey Street. The initial investigation determined the male victim had died from blunt force trauma, which made the death suspicious. But 2 days after that announcement, they made an abrupt U-turn. They declared that the man had a self-inflicted gunshot wound and that his death was not suspicious and was not being treated as a homicide. His was the 13th body pulled from the lake since July 2022. The authorities would have you believe that their deaths are all tragic, but most importantly, unrelated accidents. However, it doesn't take much imagination to see the link between all of them. Let's take a look at just those 13 to start. On the 13th of April 2024, Austin police were called to reports of a body in the water near the Longhorn Dam. Authorities declared the body belonged to an unidentified black male and that the circumstances of his death were not suspicious. Those words were cold comfort to locals who counted him as the 12th body pulled from the lake in 22 months, the 4th in 2024 and the 2nd in a month. Less than a week earlier, on the 9th of April, an unidentified body was found on the shore of the lake near a popular walking trail. Authorities declared the death was not a homicide, and it did not appear as though the person had been in the water. 2 months prior, in February of 2024, a woman's body was pulled from the water in similarly vague circumstances. She has not been identified publicly. In June of 2023, the body of Mogha Dogale was retrieved from the lake. The police statement for his death made it clear that there were no suspicious circumstances, and the case was not being treated as a homicide. Very little is known about these 4 victims in their lives before they were pulled from the lake. This may be in respect to their families' wishes for privacy, but we also have to consider that with the alarming increase in deaths at the lake, there has been increased scrutiny of the authorities, and they will be keen to avoid fueling rumors of a serial killer in the area. But if we look back to the bodies found prior to Mogha, we can see a disturbing pattern beginning to emerge. On the 1st of April 2023, the body of 33-year-old Jonathan Honey was recovered from the lake on the same day that he was reported missing. Jonathan was a cheerful and a positive guy with a cheeky grin which could warm even the coldest of hearts. He was also highly intelligent with a Master of Science degree in Systems Engineering. Outside of academia, Jonathan loved athletics and long-distance running in particular. John was not a local of Austin, and in fact, at the time of his death, he was visiting the area for a bachelor party. The night prior, he hit the clubs in the Rainy Street area of downtown Austin with his friends. When everyone went their separate ways, he stopped by a taco truck on the way back to the accommodation, but he never showed up, and he was reported missing a few hours later. His cause of death was determined to be an accidental drowning, and authorities determined that his death was not suspicious. Jonathan was found the same month that the body of the 30-year-old Christopher Hayes Clark was retrieved from the waters of Lady Bird Lake. Chris was a father of one with a great sense of humor and a similarly infectious smile to that of Jonathan Honey. He was found on the 15th of April near the Longhorn Dam area. His cause of death has not yet been released, but at the time of writing, investigators stated that they did not believe that there was anything suspicious about the incident. Go back another month to the 5th of March 2023, when the bodies of 40-year-old Clifton Axtell was fished from the waters of Lady Bird Lake, near Riverside Drive. Clifton was a husband and a father of 2 who worked as a land specialist in Austin. He went missing on the 25th of February after having drinks with his friends in the Rainy Street area. He never returned home, and his wife reported him missing. A week later, his body was found in the water. His cause of death was listed as undetermined, with authorities saying that it was not being investigated as suspicious. Exactly 1 month earlier, 30-year-old Jason John went missing in similar circumstances. Jason was not an Austin native, but he had called the city home for 2 years after moving to New York. He was an easygoing guy who loved his family and never missed a check-in with his mom. He doted over his dog and was a member of several Indian community groups. Unlike the other victims though, some of John's movements on the night that he disappeared were captured on CCTV footage. After meeting up with friends in the Rainy Street area, he was seen walking down the road towards his home. At about the halfway point, the cameras lost sight of him. The next morning, he was reported missing by his roommates, who noticed that he hadn't come home. It was 8 days before his body was found in Lady Bird Lake. In the meantime, his mum had been frantically trying to track her son down from her home in New York. When he didn't check in after 24 hours, she flew to Austin to help search for him. She later told media that she was repeatedly turned away from police departments. Of course, they didn't think it was necessary to mention that he was at least the 4th guy in his 30s to have gone missing in suspicious circumstances in the last 6 months. Jason's autopsy determined that his cause of death was drowning. The authorities publicly stated that his death was not suspicious, and they implied that he had taken his own life by entering the water. But anyone who knew Jason knew that he hated the water. No amount of intoxication could have ever changed that fact. Jason had no history of mental illness, no signs of depression, and by all accounts, He was enjoying the success of life that he had built himself. Even on the night that he went missing, he left the dinner early so that he could go home and see his dog, who he didn't like to leave alone for too long. In December 2022, 2 bodies were retrieved from the lake within just 1 week. One was Josu Moreno, who was found shot and submerged in the cab of a vehicle which had driven through a bridge railing and crashed into the lake. This appears to be the only case of a body from the lake triggering an investigation by the police. The APD put out a statement asking for members of the public who had been in the area to come forward with any information. On the 22nd of December 2022, the Austin Police Department made a brief statement to say that the body of 56-year-old Kyle Thornton had been retrieved from the lake. No foul play was involved, and the investigation is closed. This was almost identical to the statement that they made regarding the discovery of the body of Christopher Gutierrez 2 weeks earlier on the 10th of December 2022. Christopher Gutierrez was found dead in the water after going out for dinner with his brother and having drinks with a friend, all in the Rainy Street area. He was found fully clothed, and his cause of death was listed as drowning. And I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, but the authorities determined that his death was not suspicious. They took it one step further when they shared that alcohol had been found in his system. But Christopher's family were not convinced, mostly due to the fact that he had a large contusion on the back of his head, but also because the amount of alcohol in his system was not enough to make him act out of character and to get into the water fully clothed. Interestingly, there was also CCTV footage of Chris from the night that he went missing, which showed him acting out of character during the night. For these reasons, his family believe that he was drugged during his time in the Rainy Street area. They assert that he was then followed and attacked as he got close to the lake's edge. Rewinds to the 14th of July 2022, when the body of a 59-year-old Ricky Parks was retrieved from the lake. His death was also determined to not be suspicious, and no investigation was carried out. According to online commentators, these 13 deaths mark the deadliest chapter of the resident serial killer who had been operating in downtown Austin since the early 2000s. But they aren't the only victims associated with this potential killer. Pre-2022. Before Christopher, there was also Christian Pugh, who went missing after a night out in, you guessed it, the Rainy Street area in 2019. He was found a few days later, but he was located on the opposite side of the lake to where he went missing. Christian was found alive, but barely. He had been attacked and seriously injured. When walkers found his body near a trail, he was taken to a hospital and put in a medically induced coma. He made a full physical recovery, but to this day, he has no recollection of the missing hours between when he disappeared and when he was found, including how he came to be on the other side of the lake. It's important to note that the location where Chris was found was just a mile from where Christopher Gutierrez disappeared. In 2018, Christopher White went missing after visiting Austin to attend a music festival. A week later, his body was found in a section of the Colorado River, which feeds into Lady Bird Lake. Earlier that year, Randy Lexvold was found dead in Shoal Creek, which also feeds into the lake. His cause of death was determined to be drowning, despite the fact that he had several broken bones, including his collarbone, his right thumb, broken ribs, as well as a broken femur. His whole body was a patchwork of scrapes and bruises, which meant that authorities had been unable to identify any defining features, or even his gender or race when his body was found. But even with all of these injuries, the authorities still said that the death was accidental and not suspicious. Even the medical examiner noted that he wasn't sure whether Chris simply fell, was pushed, was hit by a car and knocked over, or whether he jumped. Thus, the manner of his death is undetermined. The final victim to mention is 22-year-old Julio Santos, who was found dead in 2015. He was born and raised in Austin, but was about to move to Seattle to start his dream job. When his body was examined, the toxicology report showed the presence of alcohol but no drugs. His cause of death was ruled as drowning. I don't want to say that Julios is the final victim, because these are not the only deaths associated with Lady Bird Lake. Far from it. If you search Lady Bird Lake on Reddit, you'll see many more associated deaths going back as far as Riyadh's in 2008, like that of Alano Valley and Iran David Rublik in 2014, or Luis Ramirez in 2015 and Fernando Domingo Ortiz in 2016. Many more victims are not named, either because they are genuinely unidentified or because their names have never been released to the public. It's the rate of deaths at the lake and the circumstances of those deaths which locals and online sleuths alike believe indicates that there is a serial killer using the shores of Lady Bird Lake as both a hunting and disposal ground. But because the police continue to state that all of these deaths were not suspicious, there were no autopsies, no investigations, and no connection identified between these men or their deaths. At least not officially. But as we have seen with so many cases, online sleuths have drawn connections between the victims which the authorities have either overlooked or missed completely. In the case of Lady Bird Lake, the similarities are plentiful and chilling. All except for one of the bodies pulled from the lake are males. All of them are in their 20s or 30s, except for Cliff and Randy. All of the men were drinking in the evenings prior to going missing. None of them had drugs in their system, and none of them were known to drink to excess, or even to the point where they made reckless decisions. Several of the men had a fear of the water, and were known to actively avoid it even when drinking or partying. And a huge proportion of the victims were last seen in the Rainy Street area before they disappeared. If you're not familiar with downtown Austin, you might be thinking that Rainy Street must back onto the shores of Lady Bird Lake. Otherwise, the use of the lake wouldn't make sense, but that's not quite right. The end of Rainy Street is approximately 1.8 miles from the shore, which at an average walking pace would take around 35 minutes. Which adds another layer of doubt when you consider that the authorities are saying that all of these supposedly very intoxicated men made at least a 35-minute walk after drinking and partying with their friends, and only a couple of those victims would have used the lake trails to walk home. For others, the lake was either opposite to where they were going or simply not the fastest or most convenient way home. Many of the victims would have been intending to catch a ride home, which makes going towards the lake even less likely. And they all went missing in the middle of the night, so it's not like they were walking alongside the lake for the views. In the mid-2000s, the rumors of a Rainy Street Ripper seemed simply that. Rumors fed by the overactive imaginations of a collective few in the Austin area. But with each new death, the word of a potential killer spreads. Now the name Lady Bird Lake has become synonymous with a haunting fear. It carries an ominous reputation as the hunting ground of a serial killer who targets athletic men in their 20s and 30s. Beyond the physical characteristics of the men, it is also their activities in the hours prior to disappearing which appear to connect them. In the opinion of online commentators who have linked the deaths, the presence of alcohol in the blood of the victims indicates that the men were targeted while they were out drinking. This activity provided the killer, or killers, the opportunity to spike their drinks with GHB or another undetectable drug, which could indicate that the perpetrator is a staff member of one of the bars in the area, possibly a bartender or a bouncer. After being drugged, each of the men either left their group or became separated, at which point the killer led or coerced them to the water's edge. Once they were out of sight of any potential witnesses, they were attacked and drowned in the murky waters of Lady Bird Lake. None of these deaths have any witnesses. In all of my research, I didn't find a single reported case of seeing something strange by the water's edge late at night, or stepping in, or calling authorities. If a serial killer is responsible for all of these deaths, they certainly have a talent for making sure that no one is around to watch them. There is one other associated case to mention. Jeff Jones was visiting Austin in June 2023 for a bachelor's party. He went out with his friends one night, and the next thing he knew, he woke up in the hospital 2 weeks later. Jeff had been found unconscious underneath a 25-foot bridge near Rainy Street. He believes that he was pushed off the bridge by the Rainy Street Ripper, and they intended for him to drown in the water below, which he only avoided by a couple of feet. Jeff was transported to the hospital, where he had metal bars inserted to stabilize his spine. When his blood was tested, he was found to have rohypnol in his system, proving that he was drugged in downtown Austin, and adding credibility to the theoretical methods being used by this potential serial killer. In 2024, with all of the talk of a serial killer using downtown Austin as a hunting ground, the authorities decided to make a statement to put the rumors to rest once and for all. On Twitter, they posted, "I realize that there is a rampant rumor about a potential serial killer here in Austin. We have found no evidence of that. It's a horrible circumstance that we have these, and we look at each one to determine the circumstances in which they occurred. Some of them are accidental, and unfortunately, some of them are also suicides." Although these cases are still under investigation and evidence is being analyzed, at this time, there is no evidence in any of these cases to support allegations of foul play. While each incident has occurred at the lake, the circumstances, exact locations, and demographics surrounding these cases vary. They went on to say that with such a large body of water, there is an expected level of deaths associated with the area each year. According to them, none of the deaths which have been linked together go above or beyond the expected number of deaths on the lake. The official statement didn't have the intended effect for two main reasons. First of all, if there are so many bodies and so many deaths, why isn't anything being done to address that issue? Why isn't action being taken to make the lake safer if so many people are dying? The authorities and the city council will have you believe that they have taken drastic measures to do just that, but the bodies keep on coming. I'll make a quick note of another theory which has been tied to the deaths at Lady Bird Lake, though it has less credibility than other theories. The smiley face killers. The smiley face killers theory originated after the 1997 drowning death of Patrick McNeil in New York. Detective Kevin Gannon noticed unusual evidence, including ligature marks, that suggested foul play on Patrick. He then put a team of detectives together who connected those factors to a string of similar drownings across the Midwest and Northeast of the USA. All of the deaths involved young, athletic men found in bodies of water, but who hadn't necessarily drowned. They believed the deaths are the work of a network of serial killers who targeted victims at bars, abduct them, and then dispose of their bodies in water to limit the amount of evidence which can be collected from the victims. They also theorized that the killers leave a morbid signature at the site where they put the bodies into the water, a graffiti smiley face. In the early days, after the theory was posted online, it gained a lot of traction, particularly on Reddit and crime forums, but law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, have largely dismissed it due to a lack of concrete evidence. They argue that the connections between the cases are coincidental and that most deaths were likely due to accidents or unrelated crimes. In recent years, the smiley face killers theory has resurfaced in connection with the deaths at Lady Bird Lake. Online communities have noticed the eerie presence of smiley face graffiti near some of the recovery sites, leading many to speculate that the same killers linked to the smiley face theory might be targeting victims in Austin. Conclusion: I'm not here to tell you what to believe, and the mystery surrounding Lady Bird Lake is certainly a tangled web of speculation, facts, and fear. Authorities maintain that the deaths are tragic but unrelated, yet the tide of public opinion is as swift-moving as the tide, and as more recent deaths have been reported, so too has growing distrust and speculation amongst the public. Whether you see the connections between the victims as coincidence or evidence of something more sinister, the unsettling aura around Lady Bird Lake remains undeniable.